So this is my pal Chris. Chris, this is the ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to Dublin. This is your first time here.
It is indeed.
What do you think of us, Chris? Do you think
My
it's
God.
strange we're all sitting here on this hot sunny day discussing?
I'm waiting for the rain.
Yeah. So you are a teacher, the Iowa program, Iowa Writers Program, very renowned, the oldest creative writing program in the United States, founded in 1936. And I work at the University of Limerick's creative writing program, which was founded last September. So we're probably the newest one in the whole world. Chris, give me some advice. What do you think creative writing programs need to be doing now? Given that book selling and how we consume literature and how we think about literature and how we make it has changed so much, even over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
How does teaching it need to change?
Well, the teaching has always been the same thing, which is to give writers, young writers or old writers, wherever they're starting, permission to try things out. I love Beckett's idea, fail again, fail better. If we can figure out a way to create a space in which writers can fail and understand that that's part of how you learn to do your work, and then you move on and write the next piece. That's really been what's been at the heart of the Iowa model for something like 80 years now. I was thinking last week in Minneapolis, there was a dean made a decision 90 years ago to grant graduate credit for creative work in Iowa. In writing, in dance, in painting, in theater. And last week in Minneapolis, 12,000 poets and writers gathered together for the annual conference of the Associated Writers and Writing Programs. They brought $30 million into Minneapolis. It was a big economic boom. And it all came out of one dean making a decision to honor creative work. And that's what we've been doing ever since. And I'm delighted that Limerick is on board as well.
We finally caught up. What do you say, Chris, to I mean, it's a criticism that's sometimes made, it's actually featured in the media a good bit in recent times, that creative writing can't be taught.
Yeah. Well, there was a wonderful line of Flannery O'Connor wondering if creative writing programs discouraged writing and discouraged writers, and she said not enough of them. In some ways you can't teach genius, but you can teach good writerly habits, taking chances, working on a regular basis, and you can teach some of the principles of creativity, and that's really what artists across the board share. Now, what a writer does with that material, what they do with what you teach them, that's entirely up to them. And I like to say that when I was a student, it seemed to me that always the teachers knew they would pick out one writer in the class who they thought would become the writer, and they never got it right, because the teacher can almost never gauge how much a writer wants to be a writer, how much hunger they have. And
that's a very important part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think that creative writing courses can nurture that? Do you think you can't teach genius? Do you think you can teach talent?
Well, talent suggests interest, and you can cultivate talent and interest. You can read something that someone has written and say, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Have you thought about trying this?" You can help them save a little bit of time along the way, and then they will do with it what they will.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you become a writer? Think of that.
For me, it started with reading, and I grew up in a house where books were valued, and it's one of the great things about Irish life. Just thinking about it now, when Philip and the other colleagues were speaking, that I think culture and the arts truly are valued here in a way that they aren't in other societies. It's one of the cliches of Irish life that's true, and my parents, who are from the Liberties in the south inner city of Dublin, left school at the age of 13. They didn't have much in the way of formal education at the time, but they used to say to us growing up in 1970s Ireland, which was a rather rainy, miserable, unfriendly, inefficient, corrupt place, that we don't do a lot of things brilliantly here. If a park bench gets vandalised in Ireland, which it will, 3 weeks as soon as it's put in, nobody's ever going to fix it. And we don't do government very well, and we don't do happiness very well. But it is the home country of Yeats and Joyce and Brendan Behan and Edna O'Brien, and you should probably know something about that. And they thought that this was an inheritance and a patrimony, as something that would be enormously enriching to your life, rather than it being something you had to learn about at school. So they would take us to plays, and they would give us novels and collections of short stories as when we were children, and I think it just opened the doors of that world to us. And three of the four children in that family now work in the arts, but I think it all came from just having a love of them. And I suppose that is something that needs to be said at gatherings like this, where the arts are monetized, and we can understand why that is important, but primarily the arts are for us. I mean, the arts are to celebrate and to dream and to imagine. There are passports to other worlds, and they're the pillow that we sleep on, and I think primarily they're to build us up. But it's been a very interesting thing over the last few years, which, as you know, have been very economically challenging in Ireland, that in fact the audiences for arts events have gone up. If you were to go to the opening night of something like the Listowel Writers' Week in County Kerry, we should do that together sometime, there would be 1,000 people there, or 1,000 or 1,200 people at an event which is basically a series of poets reading. So I think people have come back to the arts in a very powerful new way over the last couple of years, as the conversation about what kind of society we're going to be now, the conversation that Philip referred to, begins to take place. So it's a very exciting time. I don't want to go on too much about it. One of the things we're trying to do at the University of Limerick's new creative writing program is to think internationally from the beginning of this. So we're hoping to have a creative writing summer school in New York next year, run under the UL banner. But you guys, the international program is very central to what you do. So would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the man who ran the Writers' Workshop for about 25 years, when he decided to retire, by then was hooked up with the Chinese novelist who said to him one day, "Why don't you start an international writing program?" He thought that was the craziest idea he had ever heard, and then in 1967 they created the International Writing Program, which over the last close to 50 years has brought 1,400 well-known writers from around the world for a 3-month-long residency, during which they write and they give readings, and we do translation workshops. We like to call it a United Nations of Writers, and I like to tell audiences in Iowa that the writers come and they fall in love with one another, and then they fall out of love with one another, and then they write books about it. So people have a slightly racier view of Iowa than most Americans do. We think of Iowa as being flyover country, but actually a lot of really interesting stuff is going on a daily basis. And what happens in our program, by virtue of having so many different voices in conversation, and it's not just in the classroom, it's what happens after at the bars, in the restaurants, and in those walks down the street. That's where new ideas come about. I'm thinking particularly we had a shadow puppeteer and poet from Malaysia who struck up a conversation with a novelist from London, and the next thing they knew, they were putting together a shadow puppetry performance of Macbeth in Kuala Lumpur. Now, that would not have been possible in another day and age, but because they became friends, because they were batting around ideas, something new came out of it. And it might fail, but try it again, fail better.
A number of Irish writers have undertaken this program over the years. So tell us some of them.
From the beginning, John Banville, Edna O'Brien, Mike Finn, Patty Woodworth. I was thinking last night we had an event here, and Martin Dyer was reading. When Seamus Heaney died, Martin put together a memorial service in Iowa City, and I think Martin would probably have been the first to tell you that he was surprised at what a close connection all the writers in Iowa City had to Seamus Heaney. He was, for us, he felt like one of ours. He came quite regularly to Iowa City, and I was thinking that I had the good luck to interview him one day while he was there, and I drove him in this very old car to the radio station, and it was so old that the plastic sheathing around the steering wheel had worn off. It was just metal, and we got there, and the engineer went to test his voice, and he said, "I was driven here this morning in the most remarkable car, held together entirely by rust and prayer." And when Iowans heard that, they thought, "Oh yeah, he's one of ours." And that's what goes on in these kinds of
That's how Ireland has been held together over the last 5 years. So I have to say to people who haven't had the pleasure of visiting Iowa City, as I have had twice, that it is a really remarkable place for people who are interested in literature. It's one of the great literary cities in the United States. The writing program is very much at the heart of how the city sees itself. Iowa City has one of the United States, probably one of the world's great bookstores, Prairie Lights, where if you turn up to give a reading there, 200 or 300 people will be there, and it's a really wonderful place for anybody interested in culture to visit. Now, I can tell telepathically that you want me to stop. I'll ask one last question of Chris, which is, do you keep in touch with the kind of younger generation of Irish writers, the people who've published debut novels recently? And if you do, have you noticed anything about them that makes them different from the generation before?
What a good question. Well, I was just introduced to Sarah Baum last night, and we were talking about her work earlier today, and it seems to me to be a very lively time, and writers who are moving around the world in interesting ways, writing in frankly realistic mode, but with a kind of heightened sense of their place within the international order. And I'm always eager to find out more, and with any luck, one or more of them will be in our program this fall.
Well, that would be great. I think they're a fantastically ambitious, hard-working, well-read, kind of professionally think. I notice with our students, people who apply to us for the MA at Limerick, they've already thought about having a career. When I was their age, I hadn't even thought about getting up out of bed before 12 o'clock any day ever. But I might have thought about writing one book. But Ireland has 25-year-old people now who've thought about the next 5 books they're going to write. They've read everything. They've all been pumped full of self-esteem at school as well. That wasn't thought useful in any way when I was a child. Like if you said to your teacher, "I feel really good about myself," you just would have quietly been disappeared, and your body would have been found some months later. But no, it is remarkable how they have this kind of huge self-belief, and they want to participate in this project that Philip and the others were talking about earlier. They really want to be involved in remaking this place. So I think you're right. It's very exciting.
I might just say one cautionary note. A famous graduate of our program who just passed away recently, the poet Philip Levine, liked to say he taught at Fresno State University, and he said, "Why did I have so much success there?" He had a whole string of great poets who came out, and he said, "Because everybody who goes to Fresno State is a loser, and they know they're a loser." And he said, "That's a good place to start for a writer."
Great. Also a good place to finish. So thank you very much, Chris. Enjoy the rest of the day.